Hello, everyone. I decided to do a gameplay analysis video for Resident Evil Remake today, as it's a very boring Sunday where I actually have quite a bit of free time to do something. So, look, Resident Evil is a series that's very important to me, and I don't tend to review many of the games on my channel because I'm completely biased towards it. I don't think I've been playing these games for nearly 30 years now, so I don't feel like I could give a fair analysis of these games. They just mean too much to me. So instead, I decided that I would just do a video where I play through the game and talk about the game in general, the gameplay mechanics, and what makes this game so special. This will be a playthrough of Real Survival Mode, which is the game's hardest difficulty. In this mode, item boxes are not linked, so if you put an item into one box, it won't appear in another box. It's very, very annoying. Um, I've also decided to play as Chill for this playthrough because she has two extra item slots. You can play through this mode with Chris, but I really don't know why you would. It just makes a frustrating mode a lot more frustrating, so it's not worth it in my opinion. On top of that, in real survival mode, you can't use any unlockable weapons, so if you unlock the rocket launcher, you will not be able to use it in this mode. On top of that, you can't, the game is automatically set to hard, and aiming is turned off. So yeah, that's the gist of it. I want to play this game on the hardest difficulty because it best demonstrates what I love about this game. So yeah, I also won't be showing any cutscenes unless they differ significantly from the original, because I think at this point everyone is familiar with Resident Evil and its cutscenes. They're pretty infamous at this point. I will also need to skip most cutscenes because I am going for under 3 hours for this playthrough. I'm showing that it is indeed possible to finish this game in under 3 hours on real survival mode. So yeah, it's also worth noting that I've put up a video of this playthrough without any commentary. If you would rather watch that instead, which I completely understand given the sound of my voice. If my parents can't listen to my voice for 3 hours, my girlfriend can't stick it. I highly doubt you guys will be able to stick it. So no worries. I won't be offended if you do decide to go elsewhere. Also, please go easy on me. This video will be mostly unscripted, but I've taken a few notes of stuff I need to talk about. But this is pretty much the first time I've ever talked for 3 hours straight, at least since my trial. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I'm not an expert at this kind of thing. So the first thing I want to talk about here is camera angles. So when Capcom decided to remake Resident Evil 1, they knew it was almost going to be a from the ground up remake where everything was going to be changed, including the camera angles. And I actually prefer the camera angles in the remake because they're a lot more claustrophobic. Like if you compare this camera angle now to the original gives you a much better view of everything around you. It's also a very flawed camera angle because it allows you to see up into the second floor where there's supposed to be zombies, but you will never be able to see or hear those zombies while in the dining room. So that's a bit of a they kind of screwed up there. So the remake mercifully fixes this problem. One thing I can say I prefer about the original is the movement speed. Movement in Resident Evil Remake feels a bit sluggish. Characters move significantly slower than they did in the original. But aside from that, nearly everything is better in the remake. Now here's where we find Kenneth's body. It's a well-known fact that in the original game, you could check Kenneth's body twice for up to 30 extra handgun bullets, which were invaluable at the start of the game because ammo can be quite scarce for the first hour or two. What I don't like about this is that it makes the game significantly easier, so I'm actually glad the remake removed it. Checking Kenneth's body in the remake will only get you a videotape that you won't even be able to watch until nearly the end of the game. So yeah, overall I find the balancing of ammo very good in the remake, almost perfect in fact. This is one of my favorite new rooms because their camera angles are just they're so cinematic. I hate using that word, but that's what they are. Of course, Resident Evil Remake uses pre-rendered backgrounds, which means that pretty much the entire world around you is a picture. It's a very nice picture. There's no polygons or anything like that. It's an image, but what using images allows you to do is it allows you to increase system resources for other things. So if you're wondering why the character models look so good for a GameCube game, it's because using pre-rendered backgrounds essentially allowed them to free up, a lot of system resources for things like character models. Which, in my opinion, Resident Evil Remake's character models look almost a generation ahead. Like they almost look like PS3 character models in a way, which is kind of crazy to think about. But yeah, I kind of felt like pre-rendered backgrounds disappeared before their time. There were very few games that used them during the PS2 era. There was Final Fantasy X, Onimusa used them, Resident Evil Remake, and Zero. But I struggle to think of any more besides that. I'm sure there are a few more besides that, but they were a rarity, which I'm kind of disappointed about, because if you look at Resident Evil Remake's visuals, they still hold up today. They're still absolutely stunning. And they simply would not look this good had they been rendered in real time. In fact, before Resident Evil Remake came out, we had Resident Evil Code Veronica, which was the first game in the series to use fully 3D rendered background, fully 3D environments. They didn't use pre-rendered backgrounds at all. But it resulted in, while I like the way Code Veronica looks, it doesn't look anywhere near as impressive as this, despite being an older game, or despite, yeah. So yeah, I liked pre-rendered backgrounds. I don't really know why they went the way of the dodo as soon as they did, but that's the way it is, I guess, now. But yeah, here in the cemetery now, this is one of the first areas in the game only areas in the game, in fact, where I'll actually end up taking damage from a zombie, because I know a lot of people complained in Resident Evil 2 Remake about zombies sometimes taking like 10 headshots to take down, but the fact of the matter is all this started with the original Resident Evil Remake. Zombies can take anywhere from 2 to 10 bullets to take down, and you'll never know. This guy here takes about 8 bullets, and then I end up blowing his head off, which is very annoying, because if you know how Resident Evil works, Resident Evil Remake works, you'll know that by blowing a zombie's head off, you actually kill him permanently. He can't come back as a Crimson Head, but you'll also know that only a few zombies get their heads blown off, so it's very annoying when you waste almost an entire clip on an enemy, and then with the final shot you blow his head off. But yeah, here's another new feature the remake added. You can actually examine items. I'm not sure. While I'm sure you could examine items in the original, you certainly couldn't detach pieces of an item or anything like that. So that's a neat new feature in the remake. So here we're going down into the crypt, and in here we need to find 4 masks in order to open a coffin. These masks all must serve as the talismans in the original game. In the original game, you needed 4 talismans to access the courtyard, but here it's 4 masks instead. Here we find our first key. This key will only open a handful of doors, but yes, it gets us on our way. Sorry if I'm talking very fast, by the way. I have a lot I want to cover, and when I talk too fast, sometimes I end up mispronouncing words or stuff like that. If you've watched any of my reviews, you might think I speak more eloquently than I actually do, but trust me when I say that with my reviews I end up re-recording lines like dozens of times. I certainly don't get them first go. So now that we have the sword key, I think that's the sword key, we can gain access to the right or left, depending on how you view it, wing of the mansion. So yes, coming up is a very infamous room, which of course is the room where the dogs jump through the window, but it's been redone brilliantly in the remake. So I will just allow you to see this now. In this room here, there is a map which you can get, but since I know the mansion like the back of my hand, there's literally no point in me picking it up. Okay, so here in the original game, what would happen is that dogs would jump through the window. I will show you that now. While in the remake, this happens instead. It's such a brilliant little cop-out, and Resident Evil Remake is full of moments like this. What's even better is if you then decide to go back down this hallway later on, the dogs will jump through the window, which is just brilliant. However, you won't be seeing that here because if you play the game correctly, you should never have to enter this hallway again. So, unfortunately, I won't be making a return trip down this hallway. So, next up, I will be going out into the yard to get some weed killer. And out here, there actually are dogs. But something a lot of players don't realize about the dogs in this game is that if you walk, dogs will be a lot less resistant to attack you. You know, they won't simply just rush to maul you as long as you're walking slowly. Now, if you're walking and you get up close and personal with them, they will attack. But yeah, it's a simple little trick that allows you to avoid a lot of combat encounters with dogs. So keep that in mind. There's also a lot of health out here. There's a lot less health in the remake than there was in the original, but I still think there's probably too many healing items. In fact, one of my biggest problems with Resident Evil Remake is that it's too easy, which might sound absurd to some people, but I think the problem with Resident Evil Remake is it adds a mechanic called defense items, which I will demonstrate later on. But with defense items, you can essentially negate any damage you might receive from zombies and other creatures by pressing a button at the right time. So here's one now. That's a dagger. So if I was to get grabbed by a zombie, I could press L2 and basically drive that dagger into a zombie's head, thereby negating any damage I might have received. While it's a good mechanic, I do feel like there's too many defense items in the game. I think by the end of this playthrough, I have 8. And that's, you know, with being grabbed quite a few times. I'd say there's about 15, 16 defense items in the game, which is absurd when you think about it. Here's another very famous area. This is where you get the shotgun. With Chill, this is a very simplistic... you just grab the shotgun and you're good, which is one of the main reasons I consider Chill's campaign considerably easier than Chris, because with Chris you have to go find an old shotgun to replace the new shotgun with, and that might take you an hour or so to do, and until that point you will only have your pistol, so yeah, you're kind of screwed with Chris. But so coming up, we have one of the most infamous lines in video game history, which of course is the Chill sandwich line. However, in the remake, it's been changed in a subtle way, but I still really like, because it's still a cringy dad joke, but it's not as unbearably embarrassing as it was in the original.
Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Really?
I never realised up until now how much Barry in the remake looks like David Harbour, but I suppose that's not a very popular opinion to have these days. Yeah, overall I think Barry and Jill's relationship is handled much better in the remake, and they actually have some very cute scenes together. The writing overall is a big step up. Apparently that's one of the main reasons Mikami and his team wanted to remake the game in the first place. They were unhappy with the game's localization, which I refuse to believe since it's fucking perfect. But apparently another reason Mikami wanted to remake the first Resident Evil is because he was unhappy with how the visuals looked, which is very strange to me, because I actually think Resident Evil is one of the better looking PS1 games. I certainly didn't think it was in need of a remake. Certainly not 6 years later, which is another thing to keep in mind. Like, you have to remember that most remakes today, you know, there's usually decades between when they originally released and when they got a remake, unless you're The Last of Us, of course, in which case it's every other week. But with Resident Evil, because the jump in technology was so massive from the PS1 to the GameCube, the game could get remade. Here you see me using a defense item, by the way. You see? Basically, I would have taken quite a bit of damage. Blew his head clean off. I would have taken quite a bit of damage there had he successfully attacked me. But because of my defense item, because I blew his head off, I was actually able to get that defense item back. So now I get to use it twice, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it for the game's challenge. Another cool addition in the remake is that stairs are connected. So you can basically walk up and down stairs in real time without a loading screen. Whereas in the original, yeah, there'd be a loading screen between the bottom of the stairs and the top of the stairs, which means enemies could not join you. Enemies couldn't walk from the second floor to the first floor. Whereas in the remake, fights can be a lot more dynamic, because an enemy on the balcony, like a hunter, for example, a hunter on the second floor can actually jump over the balcony and fight you on the first floor. It's very cool, and it's a small addition, but I really like it. And here we're about to find the first item box in the game. Now, since this is real survival, anything I put in this item box will not carry over to other item boxes in the game. So a key tip, if you want it, is to use this item box here as your main item box. Put everything you plan to keep with you for the rest of the game in this item box. The reason I say that is that this item box is closest to a lot of important areas in the game. It's closest to the courtyard, which you'll be entering quite a bit, and it's closest to the main hall. Basically, there's an item box on either wing of the hall. There's one on they're basically in the same place on opposite ends. But since not only is this item box closer to the courtyard, it's also closer to the cemetery where the 4 masks are. So any mask you find can also be put in here. As long as you use this as your main hub, you should be fine. And once you realize that, real survival mode isn't actually that bad. I don't consider it that hard. I don't. In all honesty, I find it far less annoying than Resident Evil Zero's way of doing things, which is you could drop items anywhere, which was a unbelievably annoying mechanic because you would then have to go look for the items later, and it was just a pain in the arse. I guarantee you 90% of people would say they would have rather have had item boxes in that game than the ability to drop items anywhere. And the fucking hook shot as well. The hook shot didn't work as a weapon, but it took up 2 slots, and you had to carry it with you through the entire game. I fucking hate that game, lads. I fucking hate Resident Evil 0. But yeah, Resident Evil Remake, I don't know, it does everything practically perfectly. So here we're going to find the dog whistle, which is it's a new item, and it's actually really clever when you think about that. You use the dog whistle to summon a dog who has one of the mansion's keys around its neck, which is actually a really clever way of hiding the key when you think about it, because a dog isn't going to maul its owner, but it would certainly maul anyone else trying to get close to him. So yeah, it's a small addition to the story, but I like it. It's cool. Now, I think here is where I start burning bodies. Resident Evil Remake introduced yet another new mechanic, which is the fact that you need to burn bodies in order to stop zombies from coming back. While a lot of people made a big deal about this mechanic, it really isn't anything worth writing home about. If you do things correctly, you shouldn't have to burn any more than maybe 4 or 5 bodies. So, you know, I never really had a Crimson Head come back to life at any point, because as long as you're using the top floors to move between the wings of the mansion, you shouldn't really have to kill that many zombies. So yeah, cool mechanic, I guess, but not all that game changing. So yeah, as I was saying, despite there only being 6 years between Resident Evil 1 and its remake, it doesn't feel as heinous as some other recent remakes have felt. Like Resident Evil Remake feels practically like a new game, and I think I remember reading somewhere that Mikami actually said that about 50% of the game was new. I don't believe it's that high, but I would say there's a large chunk of new content in this game, and in a lot of ways it does feel like a brand new game. I believe he wanted to include Lisa Trevor in the original, but due to time constraints or technological limitations, he wasn't able to. But I'm glad he got to revisit the game and do things the way he wanted. I often wonder just how much reverence Mikami has for Resident Evil, because I remember the dude has little to no interest in horror at all, and he was only brought onto the Biohazard Resident Evil project because he's apparently afraid of he was apparently afraid of everything, and one of the heads of Capcom thought that would mean he would create an effective horror game, and for whatever reason it worked. And yeah, but I often wonder, is this the game Mikami would have made had he been given free creative control? And I'm not sure it is. And I think the same thing applies to Kamiya, who directed Resident Evil 2. If you know Kamiya, you know the dude has little to no interest in horror and absolutely no interest in survival horror games. The dude is all about action, character action games like Bayonetta and The Wonderful 101 and Okami and stuff like that. The dude has an absolutely mind-blowing record, but yeah, it's just very strange to me how Capcom seemingly only hired people who had no interest in horror to make horror games, but it seemingly worked out for them for some reason. But after Resident Evil Remake, Mikami would of course go on to direct Resident Evil 4, and that has me just wondering, did he think survival horror had run its course? Or because Resident Evil 4, as amazing as a game as it is very action heavy, and I kind of feel like that's the game Mikami would have liked to have made in the first place, but I don't know. We can never know for sure. But if you look at the dude's output after that, he went on to direct games like Vanquish, which is a very over-the-top third-person shooter, and The Evil Inn, which has more than a few similarities to Resident Evil 4. But regardless of whether Resident Evil is the kind of game he would have wanted to make had he had been given full creative control, I think he fucking nailed it, to be honest, and I'm glad. I don't know how they picked the right guy for the job, but they did. And I would really, I don't see it happening, but I would really like to see him return to horror again at some point. A lot of people seem to believe that Mikami was inspired by Alone in the Dark when he was creating Resident Evil, and while that's true to an extent, it was never supposed to be a third-person game with pre-rendered backgrounds. It actually started life as a first-person shooter, I believe, but Mikami wasn't happy with how the visuals looked on the PS1, and I think it was around that point that he played Alone in the Dark and was impressed with the pre-rendered backgrounds and the 3D models, and he felt that the PlayStation could actually facilitate such a game. And that's how the Resident Evil we ended up with came about. I know a lot of people seem to think that the fixed camera angles and tank controls were a creative choice, but as far as I can tell, they absolutely were not. It's actually very interesting to think about what would have happened had Resident Evil initially appeared on the PS2. Would it have ended up being a first-person shooter? Here's one of the scenes in the game. This is where you blow the whistle and summon the dog. This is one of the only areas in the game where you are required to kill an enemy, and so basically, if you don't have enough ammo, you could potentially soft lock yourself here. But yeah, it's not too bad. The lack of manual aiming or the lack of auto aim on real survival mode can make this a bit of a pain in the ass. But yeah, I deal with it no problem. And I get an imitation of a key which I have to swap for the real key. It's basically identical. It's an identical puzzle to the shotgun puzzle. But there you go. Just a little bit of a tidbit for you. Yeah, so I'm curious how Resident Evil may have looked had it released 5-6 years later. Of course, we did eventually end up getting our FPS Resident Evil in the form of Resi 7 and Resi 8, or Resident Evil Village, which Resident Evil 7 might be my favourite entry in the series, maybe just behind Remake and Remake 2. I think that's a phenomenal game, and I certainly don't think it lost anything from being first person. I know there's some people out there who seem to think that I know Avalanche Reviews had this opinion for a long time, and I respect the hell out of that dude, and I've discovered many of my favourite survival horror games through viewing his channel, but something I never agreed with was the idea that for a game to be survival horror, it needed fixed camera angles and tank controls. To me, they were just a limitation of the time. I think for a game to be labelled as a survival horror, it needs resource management, a lack of resources. It needs difficult gameplay. It needs punishment for death. Basically, when you die, you don't just spawn back 5 seconds ago at the last checkpoint. So the ink ribbon system was a good inclusion to tackle that problem. So yeah, if I was to list off what I would say is necessary for survival horror, it would be scarce ammo, resource management, puzzle solving, Metroidvania style exploration, whereas you're given a choice where to go and what to do, which the early Resident Evil games absolutely allow you to do. But yeah, tank controls I just don't think are all that important in creating a solid survival horror experience. Resident Evil Remake was one of the last games to use tank controls. Again, do I think tank controls are perfect? No. Do I think they're unbearable and impossible to get around? Absolutely not. I think once they click for you, it really isn't that big a deal. And yeah, even a lot of indie survival horror games being made today, like Tormented Souls or Crow Country or what's the other one? Hollow Body. A lot of them may include an option for tank controls, but in the vast majority of cases, the recommended way to play those games it's with normal analog controls, where pressing down will always move the character down and that kind of thing. Yeah, I feel like we've moved past tank controls, but at the same time, I think people who say they're unbearable and make a game unplayable are kind of overreacting. Oh, I've been talking such bollocks now. I've forgotten where I am. I think I'm about to go get the second key, which is the armor key, I believe. But yeah, there's actually been a lot of rumors that Capcom are planning to remake the first Resident Evil again, and I honestly, excuse me, I honestly don't know why they would do that. I don't think there's any need to remake it again, and I genuinely feel like it could turn out to be a far worse game if they do. I'm not overly fond of any of the... I think Resident Evil 2 Remake is a phenomenal game, but at the same time, I don't know if it's that much better than the original. I can safely say that Resident Evil Remake makes the original game obsolete. At least to me it does. I don't really see any reason to play the original game anymore. But with Remake 2, I don't feel like it added enough to completely replace the original. They're two very different games. And as far as Resident Evil 3 goes, I genuinely think the remake for that game is terrible. I genuinely hate that game. I understand some people like it, and that's fine. You're allowed to like what you like. But I feel it cuts so much of the heart and soul from that game. And it just feels like it was rushed. It feels like it was thrown together in 6 months, which it probably was. And as far as Resident Evil 4 remake goes, it's very good, but it's a very good remake of a very good game. And again, it doesn't replace the original Resident Evil 4 for me. And I feel like a remake of the original Resident Evil would just be... First of all, it wouldn't look like this. It'd be another fucking over-the-shoulder third-person shooter, and I don't want that. We have enough of them at this point. And I just feel like it would lose something, and I really hope Capcom just decide to leave it the fuck alone. But they like money and they like the remake, so I don't foresee that being the case. Yeah, we're approaching another infamous room at this point, which is of course the Itchy Tasty room. I feel like Shinji Mikami is a very underappreciated writer. I know he's hardly Kojima when it comes to over-the-top narratives and stuff like that, but Resident Evil 1 actually shows, while the story is cheesy and ridiculous and all that, it does have some very powerful moments, and the Itchy Tasty Diary is one such moment where, it's a simple story about someone who works at the mansion or the laboratory, slowly losing his mind. It's very effective, and I can imagine it was very disturbing and even scary at the time when RE first released. I know a lot of people probably give him flack for RE4, which does admittedly have a terrible story, despite having good characters, likable characters. But you also have to remember that he wrote that story in 2 weeks, I think, because I think he was under... Resident Evil 4 went through quite a development hell, and I feel like Capcom just didn't give him... after he had to dismiss the first 2 builds of the game, or whatever it was, I feel like Capcom just weren't willing to give him any more time to come up with a new script, so he basically just had to pull it out of his ass. And look, RE4 is ridiculous. I like the game, but I don't think it has a very good story, and I kind of think it makes a show of the rest of the series, to be honest, because the first three games have look, they're not grounded exactly, but you know they make sense, and you could see something similar to that happening in the future. Like, I believe at one point the government, or you know, the U.S. government or whoever, will absolutely experiment, you know, and see if they can create bioweapons and stuff like that. Like, it's the ASO saying, you know, they were so determined to see if they could, they never thought, you know, they never stopped to think if they should. It's that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I could absolutely see a world in the future where scientists are creating zombies and whatever else. But, and those first three games were very grounded, you know, in that story. The Raccoon City trilogy, if you want to call it. You know, it does tell a compelling story, but then RE4 came along and completely went off the fucking rails. So, but despite that, you know, I still think he did well for only having 2 weeks to write a story. But my point is that Resident Evil 1 actually shows that the dude could write, you know, between, you know, the Lisa Trevor sub-story and, you know, the character moments. There's actually quite a lot to like here. So, yeah, very underrated writer, I think, Shinji Mikami. I didn't talk about at the time while it was happening, but if you were paying attention, you would notice that in the bedroom, I got grabbed 3 times by 2 zombies. And had this been the original game, it probably would have been lights out for me. But because this is the remake, and the remake has defense items, I was able to get grabbed 3 times without taking a single hit of damage, which, again, just shows how easy the game can be at times. Here we're about to get the diamond that I received for pushing the statue from the second floor. Yeah, so now that I have the armor key, I can pretty much go and open up practically every door in the mansion aside from 2 or 3. So now this is the period where you're just backtracking and tidying up all the puzzles that you forgot to do and stuff like that. Resident Evil Remake is actually a longer game, considerably longer the first time through, I find, than the original Resident Evil. I remember when you know, a standard playthrough of Resident Evil 1 could easily take you maybe 6-7 hours, but it's unlikely to take you that long. But I think my first playthrough of Resident Evil Remake took me more than 10, so that should show you how much extra content is here. I don't know, like, some people might be worried that that would affect the pacing. And, you know, is Resident Evil Remake a worse paced game than the original? I wouldn't say so. And I think because it has so many new ideas that keep things interesting. Like, yeah, I don't encounter Crimson Heads anymore, really, but during my first playthrough, the idea of them coming back to life was utterly terrifying. And, you know, that kind of thing kept you on your toes while exploring the mansion. You always felt like there was an invisible timer, you know, that everything had to get done, you know, over a certain set period of time, or all hell will break loose. And that kind of negated some of the pacing issues. But overall, I find Resident Evil Remake to be a pretty well-paced game. I feel like it reached for the stars in a few areas. And, you know, maybe in some regards, I think in some ways maybe they could have cut some of the ideas that didn't work from the original. I remember you have to go out to the courtyard twice in RE1. You have to go out. The first time you go out, it's to get to the outhouse, or the whatever the fuck it's called, the cabins. You have to get to the cabins. And the second time is to insert a battery into an elevator so you can reveal a waterfall. So so basically the first time is to access the cabin, second time is to access a waterfall. But the whole process of doing that is very annoying. You have to remember to bring the crank with you, and you have to remember to bring the battery with you, and if you don't bring both items, you have to backtrack to the house. And I always felt like it was an area that could have been done far better, but no, the remake includes all that stuff and then some. I find even the caves drag on a bit. So yeah, Resident Evil Remake isn't perfectly paced, but I also feel like it's far more fun to replay than the original was, and far more fun to go for better times as well. One thing that absolutely does drag down the pace in this release, however, is the fact you need to watch all these fucking door opening animations, and the fact that the game only runs on at 30 FPS on both PS4 and PS5, which I find completely unacceptable because the PC version runs flawlessly. I probably should have recorded the PC version instead, but my hard drive is fucked at this point, and I use Fraps to record, and anyone who uses Fraps to record knows that it absolutely destroys your hard drive in seconds. So I went for convenience and decided to record the PS5 version, PS4 version on a PS5. I understand why these door opening animations were necessary in the original. They were to cover up loading times, and they also added maybe an ominous atmosphere to the proceedings, because you didn't always know what would be on the other side of the door. But unfortunately, when you've seen these things opening 500 fucking times, I stopped caring. I stopped giving a shit what's on the other side of the door. Just please open the fucking door and get on with it. So yeah, very annoying. The PS4 version did not remove that issue. This room in the original is actually one of the earliest memories I have of watching my dad play the original Resident Evil. Yeah, my dad wasn't very good at video games, but I taught my dad as if he's dead or something. But he isn't very good at video games. But he loved Resident Evil all the same, but he was absolutely terrible at it. I remember he would always run out of ammo before getting out of the mansion because he didn't realize. You know the way you shoot a zombie 5 or 6 times, it drops to the ground, it gets back up, you shoot it again, it drops to the ground, it stays dead. Yeah, my father never realized that, so he'd just shoot zombies till they fell to the ground and then run past them. So he'd never actually kill a zombie. So he'd end up wasting 20 or 30 bullets on the same goddamn zombie, and he'd run out of ammo within half an hour. But yeah, unfortunately, unfortunately, my mother was very, very against violent video games in our house, to the extent where she even made my dad return Resident Evil one night. He had rented it out for the weekend, and he had to return it because she didn't want me and my brother watching it, which I actually feel really bad about. Thinking about it, we could have just walked out of the room and left him alone. But yeah. But what ended up happening instead is whenever my mother had to, go out to work or was going to see friends or something, me and Dad would just sit down and I'd watch them play the game, and it was great. It was an amazing experience, and I knew without even playing the game that Resident Evil was going to be one of my favorite games of all time. So unfortunately, when Resident Evil 2 came out, that was rated 18s over here in Ireland, which my mother was just completely against. The first one was 15s, which, she could kind of wave away, but we were absolutely not allowed to watch Resident Evil 2 under any circumstances. So I didn't get to. If you can believe it, I don't think I actually played Resident Evil 2 until, I don't know, maybe 2007, 2008. It was super fucking late. The first Resident Evil I ever bought, the first one I was ever allowed to play, was Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. I got it on the PC for my birthday. I remember it was weird packaging. It had a voucher for the dungeons in the UK, whatever the fuck that was. But I absolutely adored it. In a way, I think Resident Evil 3 might be my favorite one, but I think that might be due to nostalgia. The fact that it was my first proper Resident Evil. But yeah, because of that, Resident Evil 3 holds a special place in my heart. After that, consoles were kind of disallowed in our house for the majority of the PS2 generation. We had a PC instead, so we played a few games on there. Unfortunately, as many people probably know, that a lot of games didn't come to PC during the PS2 and Xbox generation, and especially Japanese games didn't come. So while I think Resident Evil 4 did receive a port eventually, it was absolutely atrocious, so we never bothered playing that. I'm saying a whole lot, but understand when I'm talking off script, this is going to happen. Okay, I'm surprised I've managed to talk for this long without going into becoming completely incoherent. So yeah, I didn't play Resident Evil 4 when it first released. It was my brother when he was 16. I think he got a job and he decided to buy himself a PS2 with that money. I think this was around 2006, and the first two games he bought for it were Metal Gear Solid 3 and Resident Evil 4. Possibly the two greatest fucking games on the system. I mean, what a way to be introduced to the PS2. This room shows one of the puzzles that I actually think is better in the original. In the PS1 version, this is a puzzle where you click on different paintings, and you're basically clicking on paintings that go from young age, from birth to old age. So you click on a baby, then you click on an infant. But it's a lot more boring in this, and it's strange because I would say the vast majority of puzzles in the remake are better. But no, I don't like this one. What I do like, however, is that it actually has a shortcut right back to the cemetery, which means, and because Jill is equipped with a lockpick, she's able to open any simple locks without any keys required. So yeah, I will say map wise, there's no question Remake is the strongest game. Everything loops back on itself so much better than the original. It's actually kind of crazy. But yeah, so my brother got Metal Gear Solid 3 and Resident Evil 4. The funny thing is, I remember playing Metal Gear Solid 3 and thinking, this is the greatest game I've ever played. I remember thinking it looked real, and just, it was such a jump above Metal Gear Solid 1. I had never played Metal Gear Solid 2. So you can imagine going from Metal Gear Solid 1 to 3, the kind of impact that would have had for me. But the weird thing is, I did play Resident Evil 4, and I didn't like it. And not only did I not like it, my brother didn't like it either. And I think the reason I hated it so much is because I was still playing it as a survival horror game. I was using a knife all the time. I never used guns. So it was just this, I'd shoot a zombie in the leg, or Ganados, whatever you would call them. And I'd run up and I'd stab him about 5 times. Then he'd get up, I'd shoot him in the leg, I'd kick him, I'd run over and stab him. And I did that throughout the entire game. I must have had like 500 bullets or something. It was so boring. And it wasn't until like years later that my brother came back to me and he was like, you know Resident Evil 4? And I was like, yeah. It's actually probably the greatest game ever made. And I didn't believe him at first. But he explained to me the proper way to play the game. Just play it like a brainless action game. Not brainless exactly, but don't worry about reserving ammunition. And I did that, and it blew my fucking mind. Here is the room where you find Forrest. It's a little bit different than in the original because in the original he's just dead. He doesn't come back to life. He won't come back to life in the remake either unless you continue down the path, which is a really nice scare. I won't be doing that here because what's the point? You'll just lose health. But I like in the director's cut of the original, he actually does get up. That scared the shit out of me the first time it happened. But yeah, it's just another cool little addition to the remake. What was I talking about? Yeah, Resident Evil 4. And then the year it came out, I think it was December, Christmas 2006, I got the Wii. And with the Wii, I was obviously able to play GameCube games. But it might sound crazy for me to even say this, but I didn't know Resident Evil Remake was a thing, even in 2006. This was before the internet. Ireland was very slow to adapt the internet. Yeah, so we didn't have internet in our house until, I think, 2008, 2009, which I'm sure sounds absolutely crazy to any Americans who might be watching, but you have to understand Ireland has never been at the forefront of technology, so we're very old-fashioned in many ways. So yeah, I remember the first game I ever played online was Modern Warfare 2, the one on the PS3, so keep that in mind. So yeah, I had no idea Resident Evil Remake was even a thing, and it wasn't until me and my family went to Paris that I actually saw the game in a game store, and my mother said I could have it as a gift. I don't know. She got us all something, and I wanted Resident Evil Remake. I I honestly thought it was like a French exclusive. I had never heard of the game, so I figured, oh, Capcom must have just made this for French people or something. I was very fucking stupid back then. You have to keep in mind. I feel kind of guilty though because my brother really wanted me to get Wind Waker. I think he really wanted to play it, but you know, while I'm sure that would have been a good game, and I ended up playing it and loving it. This was also before Amazon or buying stuff online. I figured if I didn't buy Resident Evil Remake now, I was never going to be able to play it, you know. So I went with my gut and I got Resident Evil Remake. But you know, I don't feel too bad because my brother eventually did end up getting to play Wind Waker on the Wii U, which is by far the best version. So yeah, it's not really important. But yeah, so that basically explains how I discovered Resident Evil Remake was a thing like 5-6 years after it first released. So, and obviously I played it and I was just blown away. I was blown away because I had never heard of it. To be fair, I don't think a lot of people heard of it. It didn't sell that well. And what's funny is I think the fact it didn't sell that well, for some reason publishers seem to be very, very stupid and close-minded people. When Resident Evil Remake sold poorly, instead of thinking, right, well, maybe we shouldn't have released this exclusively on the GameCube. Like, the GameCube was primarily marketed as a family-friendly console. There were mature games on there, of course, but you weren't getting Grand Theft Auto or Metal Gear Solid or anything like that on there. So why Nintendo wanted it to be the home of Resident Evil, I'll never understand. But regardless, when it sold poorly, instead of Capcom thinking, right, obviously the remake, obviously we can't keep doing survival horror games. They're tired, they're bad, people are sick of them. You know, or that's what they ended up thinking it was. But they should have realized it was due to the fact it was exclusive to a console barely anyone owned. So they probably ended up thinking it was because survival horror had its day. And I think that pushed them to move ahead with action games and move ahead with just abandoning survival horror before they really should have. And yeah, I think they thought it was a dead genre, and I think they continued to think it was a dead genre until they released RE7. So that shows you, like, we had a. My point here is that I think publishers sometimes they don't use their heads. They think just because a game sells poorly that means no one's interested in that game. But I can tell you right now, had the game released on PS2, it would have sold a lot better, in my opinion. I realise I've been talking for nearly an hour, and yet I've barely talked about the game itself. But keep in mind, I find the history and development of this game a lot more interesting than talking about the game itself. Not that the game itself isn't interesting. It is, but it is a classic survival horror game. It's not the most mechanically complex game out there. However, I think I will be soon going to see Richard, and I really like what they did with Richard in the remake. So in the original game, Richard gets poisoned by a snake, and it is up to you to find serum. But regardless of whether you get the serum in time or not, he does end up dying, and all you get for it is a radio that barely does anything. In the remake, however, depending on which character you're playing as, Richard can actually help you take down a boss, and you'll actually get a new shotgun, a much more powerful shotgun, from helping him. So it is absolutely worth doing in the remake. As I said, the remake, while it shares many ideas with the original game, it expands those ideas significantly. It's these days most developers think, all people want is a fresh coat of paint, but that's just not the case at all. Like the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, I'm not the biggest fan of, because all it is a reskin. Same thing with The Last of Us Part 1 and Darksiders War Mastered, the worst fucking name ever conceived. If all remakes had this kind of effort poured into them, I just feel like people wouldn't complain about remakes half as much. And I think, as much as I love RE2 remake, that's Richard there now. You're under a timer. You need to get serum for his bite, for his wound in time. But you're given think you're given about between 5 and 10 minutes. So as long as you haul ass, you'll have no problem making it. I think one of my biggest issues with the RE2 remake is that, as much as I love that game, there wasn't a whole amount of new content in there. They improved the sewer section, which I thought was by far the worst section in the original. But aside from that, there's only a handful of new rooms in Remake 2. Whereas, like I said before, this feels like a brand new experience. And as I've also said, I think RE3 Remake is absolutely terrible, so keep that in mind. But yeah, once you get the serum, you can return to Richard, and yeah, then there's only a handful of puzzles left to clean up, like the piano puzzle and stuff like that. While I don't expect to ever see another Resident Evil game in this style, I do get confused as to why it isn't possible. Now, I'm probably going to sound incredibly stupid, and keep in mind, I know very little about how the video game industry works, but there was a report last year, or the year before, that Spider-Man 2 on the PS5 cost over $300 million to make, which is beyond fucking ridiculous. And, I'm not even sure it made that money back. I'm like, how many copies would it have to sell? Like $80, 4 million. 4 million might cover it, but that's assuming 4 million people buy it at full price, or or any other number of factors could come into play. But even then, like, it's such a ludicrously large amount of money that I just don't understand why you do it. When I realize that Silksong is probably going to sell better than Spider-Man 2, and it cost had an infinitely smaller budget. I sometimes wonder why aren't Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft, why aren't they making more indie games or stuff like that? Is there a reason they can't? Why can't Capcom continue making AAA Resident Evil games, but have a few smaller indie projects on the side? That maybe tap into more of the how Resident Evil games used to be made. There probably is a reason that I'm too stupid to see, but personally, I think spending anywhere near 300 million to develop a video game is fucking insane. I know AI will probably take over a lot of that in time, but as of right now, I just don't understand how this is sustainable. And when I think how this game was only made in 14 months, I think. RE Remake only took about 14 months, and it had a very small team and a very small budget, and yet it's still one of the greatest games ever made. It just makes me wonder, like what the fuck are we doing here, This room right here can be incredibly frustrating when you're playing as Chill, because you have to remember to bring the lighter with you, and this is probably one of the only areas in the game where it's necessary to use the lighter, outside of burning bodies, of course. If you don't light these candles, you're unable to see, that's such a good shot, you're unable to see what's in this cabinet here, which means you can't pick up the musical score, which you need in order to play the piano, which you need in order to get the shield, which you need in order to get the key that allows you to fight Yawn, the snake. So, as you can see now, it's coming up on 53 minutes, and I'm still not out of the mansion. They did little to tighten up the mansion area, but in a way I'm glad. I feel like you can't win with a lot of these remakes. If you remove stuff, it would piss a lot of fans off. So I'm kind of glad they kept it as is. It's probably not the most exciting thing to watch, but personally, I'm glad they kept it the way it is. It just makes the game feel more complete, and yeah. It's worth noting that despite the fact that this style of RE game is by far my favourite, I'm still looking forward to RE Requiem, and I'm a fan of most games in the series. I think the only ones I dislike are Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil Revelations 2, and this probably won't be a popular choice, but Resident Evil 5. I feel like people are going to think, you think RE6 is a better game? I don't think the campaign is better. I think Mercenaries mode in RE6 alone is better than RE5. I think the mechanics in that game are absolutely outstanding. In fact, I'd recommend you just go buy RE6. Next time it's often on sale for like a fiver. Just pick it up for the mercenaries mode alone. You'll have an absolute blast. I think the problem with RE5 is that it didn't evolve enough. You couldn't walk while shooting, and that would be fine, except it had enemies that could shoot back at you. It had a Gears of War style cover system. I didn't like the setting. I genuinely dislike RE5, despite putting like 200 hours into the game. But despite what this video might lead you to believe, I genuinely think our Resident Evil has had one of the best track records in gaming. You know, even its bad entries still have stuff to like about them. You know, I just think Capcom are just too good. Also, I don't know if this new format is going to take off. You know, I feel like maybe I'm rambling a bit here. I don't know, but if you would like me to do a gameplay analysis of Resident Evil 0, that's something I would like to do at some point, because it's such a fascinating game. The weird thing about RE0 is there's a great game underneath some really, really awful design decisions, and it would be a very interesting game to talk about. I just decided to do this gameplay analysis video because I was getting burnt out on doing reviews. Many of them take 2 or 3 weeks to make, and as you know, I like to cover obscure indie games, and those don't always get the most amount of views. My last review was for Buy Sweet Carol, and if you look at other reviews for that game, you know, a load of them are at like 100, 200 views, because no one knows about the goddamn game. And I was simply dedicating too much of my time to that, and this is something that's easier for me to do. And you know, considering I have a job and I have a life outside of YouTube, I find this more comfortable right now to do. So yeah, let me know if you would like to see more videos like this. If you're still here, I'd imagine the last of you have left recently because you just couldn't stick my voice much longer. But if you are still here, yeah, let me know. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. So all that's left to do at the mansion at this point is get the key to the snake room, get the last mask, kill a Crimson Head, and then we're off to the courtyard. Another aspect here that I haven't been able to show off yet, but it's a really cool inclusion, one of the best I think, is the fact that zombies can actually move between rooms now. In the original they were stuck. If you left a room, that zombie was essentially stuck there, but now they're able to break through doors into other rooms, and I think it's one of the first games to do that, at least dynamically, not in a scripted sense. Yeah, so that's a really cool inclusion. And I think Hunters can do it as well, but Hunters actually knock the door down entirely, which is really cool. This puzzle is very I like the solution to this puzzle because one of the hands is meant to stay where it begins. You know with most puzzles, you always have to end up moving everything, but this one kind of throws you for a loop by having one of the hands already in the right position. I'm probably talking shit, don't mind me. So now I get the key, and this key only opens a single door in the mansion, and that is the key to the attic where Yawn the snake lies. I also save it here. Now, during this playthrough, I don't save it any more than 3 times. Realistically, I could have done the whole thing without saving once. That's not me bragging. It's just not the hardest game in the world, and once you know how to do it, you know how to do it. But I wanted to be safe, and I didn't want to just piss away the last hour of gameplay. It's also worth noting that after every single part, I take a break, so you will see me restart the game here. So I will let that happen, and then I will continue the commentary. I know I probably could have just cut that part out, but you don't underestimate how lazy I am today. I'm not doing shit. Right, so our next port of call is the attic, and what's funny is this playthrough, this time while playing Resident Evil, this is the first time I ever played Real Survival. No, this is my second playthrough of Real Survival, but it was my first time. This time I decided I was going to go for the Platinum Trophy. I have, as of right now, I have not got the Platinum yet, but I decided to play the game differently than how I usually would, which means most times when Richard helps me out in the attic, I run, I let him die, I get the mask, I get the fuck out. This time I decided to stay back and help, despite it knowing it would cause me to lose health. Oh, motherfucker, I'm not going to the attic yet. Sorry, I obviously have to make a quick pit stop. But yeah, I decided to stay back and help him. And the reason I did that was because I wanted a trophy for killing Yawn, or surviving the first encounter with Yawn, which, believe it or not, I've never got before, because I just never saw the point in killing him. But there is a reason to kill him in the remake if you have saved Richard. And that is, Richard drops the assault shotgun, which, as I've previously mentioned, is far more powerful than the default shotgun. And since I need as much space as I can, because I don't want to be storing stuff in item boxes all the time, having a shotgun that can hold more shells at once is a godsend. So, yeah. Yeah. Checking defense items there, even though there's no real need to. I know I've complained about the defense item system, but one good aspect of defense items is that they can't be used against bosses. I can't think of any that have any moves that can, where you're able to use them. So, you know, if you're relying on them too much, you're still going to get your ass handed to you by bosses, because they'll simply one-shot you without a second thought. Yawn is, after fighting him, Yawn is surprisingly a lot easier than I thought he'd be. The main thing that's going to happen is you're almost definitely going to get poisoned if you choose to fight him. But there's serum nearby, and you... One thing I will say about hard mode, one thing I will say about real survival mode is there's very few blue herbs. I think I counted like 3 or 4, so you really want to make sure you don't get poisoned that often. But aside from that, yeah, Yawn is a piece of piss as long as you're careful. I suppose the biggest issue with this guy on real survival difficulty is that you don't have lock on. So you kind of just... But then again, he's a large fucking snake, you know. You're not going to miss his body either. Now here Richard comes to actually give me help. Now he uses his assault shotgun. He's a bit of a dipshit because, you know, he's clearly fucked. And yet he keeps getting himself in all these situations. No matter what happens, he dies. If he didn't die from the snake, he'd die from the shark. And if he didn't die from the shark or the snake, he'd die from being poisoned. He has a death wish, basically. So anyways, you're going to shoot Yawn a few times, and this will lead to Richard getting eaten. Don't feel too guilty about it. The pros outweigh the cons. You get a shotgun, which is far better than having him alive. Yeah, so this is, again, believe it or not, this is the second time I've ever seen this cutscene, which is crazy after playing this game for 20 years. But now, again, you probably think, oh shit, the fight starts all over again. No, he's nearly dead. Don't start this fight without the intention of finishing it, because he is nearly dead by this point. I think 2 or 3 more shots to be enough to finish him off. And once you've done that, you can go take the mask, and you're all ready to go. Now, by this stage in the original, I would have everything I'd need to leave the mansion and get to the courtyard. But there is one extra step I have to take in the remake, and that is return to the cemetery and put the last mask into its slot so that the coffin will unlock. And yeah, then there's a little surprise in there for me. Of course, as I said would happen, I got bit during the fight against the snake, which means I first have to haul ass all the way back to the room with the serum, which is a bit of a pain in the arse, especially when I'm talking off script and I'm struggling to come up with fucking shit to talk about. But yeah, the only other alternative would be to use a blue herb, and as I've said already, those are in scarce supply in on hard mode. So yeah. I feel like while you might think that the first mansion area is quite large, I find the pace of the game improves quite significantly after this. The courtyard and the cabins only take up about half an hour, which is very surprising. I didn't expect to see that. And then the return to the mansion, if you know what you're doing, is also another half hour. And then the rest of the stuff is about 45 minutes. So, yeah, that first hour can definitely feel like a bit of a slog after you've played this game. I suppose that's one of the main reasons I don't replay RE Remake as much as other games in the series. Because it's almost a game of memorization. When you know how to get through Resident Evil Remake, you know how to get through Resident Evil Remake. It's not so much a game of skill as it is, managing your resources properly, which is fine. That's what I like about survival horror. But yeah, I don't return to this one as often because I don't feel like the challenge is there. I feel like it's a game I just know it too well at this point. I've easily played it 30, 40 times over the last 20 years to the point where I feel like it has nothing to offer me anymore. Whereas something like Resident Evil 2 with its randomizer mode, or RE7 with its mini games and stuff like that. Like RE7 had amazing DLC. It had DLC that was even the equivalent of like a Nazi zombies mode. And yeah, I feel like what this game needs more than anything would be a randomizer mode. Almost like a roguelike mode where you don't know where enemies are going to appear and stuff like that. And yeah, like I said, there's not a huge amount of enemies in RE Remake, and there's not a huge amount of action. And while I don't think that stuff is necessary for a good survival horror game, I just enjoy the later sequels because they're more dynamic. I feel like there's more dynamic situations that can play out in various different ways because, yeah, I don't know. Like even with RE2 Remake, there's 4 different scenarios. That's the thing. You have Leon A, Leon B, Claire A, Claire B. And while you could technically learn one of those scenarios off by heart, you're very unlikely to remember where every single zombie is in every single scenario, So that keeps you on your toes, I feel. And that also applies to the original RE2. Our Resident Evil 3, of course, had the choice system where, depending on what decisions you made, Nemesis might show up in a different area. There might be lickers in one area instead of zombies. There were like dozens of different ways RE3 could play out, which also kept you on your toes. I feel like Remake just doesn't have that kind of replay value. Now, this is probably the only Crimson Head. It's certainly the only Crimson Head in the game I fight. But if you're careful, this is the only Crimson Head you'll have to encounter. So it's a pretty simple fight. I just put them down with 3 shotgun shells. But if you don't see them coming, they can be very aggressive. So yeah, now I finally have the metal piece that will allow me to exit the mansion. And from here we are going to the court. Not straight to court. First we're going to visit Lisa Trevor's cabin, which is a brand new area and a really good area too. I'm going to be doing this gameplay analysis in 2 parts, by the way, and I'll probably end this part in half an hour or so. So it's about half and half because I'm very hungry right now. But yeah, I want to cover the first part of the courtyard because it's. I feel this next area is where the biggest changes to the remake are seen. So yeah. Also, I'm not usually the kind of person to recommend DLC, but please, if you haven't already, buy RE7's DLC because it's the best DLC of any game I've ever played. It's so varied and there's so much to do. It's absolutely incredible. I think my favorite piece of DLC is the 21. It's called. It's Blackjack, but it's Blackjack if Blackjack was a game in a Saw film. If that makes any sense. It's utterly absorbent. And I think there's a story mode that plays out over the course of maybe half hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then there's just a normal blackjack mode that you could potentially spend hours playing. And it's really, really fun. Aside from that, you have don't fucking forget the other ones. Bedroom. Bedroom is like Misery in video game form. If you're aware of what Misery is, it's a book by Stephen King where a writer gets basically imprisoned in a woman's bedroom. She's a big fan. Something similar happens in RE7, and basically what you're doing is solving puzzles in the bedroom without the woman of the house, Marguerite is her name, without her finding out what you're doing, and it is absolutely fantastic. It's the best. It's like an escape room kind of thing, but it also features some of the best puzzles in any RE game, and that's it's kind of disappointing to admit, but most Resident Evil games have very disappointing puzzles. But Bedroom is the complete opposite. It has fantastic puzzles, and it's well worth playing through. On top of that, you also have I think one of the big pieces of DLC. I can't remember the name of the guy you play as, but you basically play as this guy who punches everything. It's like a beat 'em up. It's like Condemned almost, if you remember that game. And you're just beating the shit out of all these monsters, and it's an absolute blast. It plays more like a 3D beat 'em up than a survival horror game, but I had so much fun with that one. Now we're finally here near the courtyard. Instead of going straight ahead though, we are going to go to the right, because if we go straight ahead, we will not be able to continue much further because we do not have the crank yet. We instead need to go to the right and access this brand new area here. Yeah, so I'm glad the developers were able to expand out like this, you know. Here's a puzzle where you basically need to turn two statues in a certain direction. I'm ashamed to admit that I still haven't quite figured. I know the solution, but I haven't quite figured out why that's the solution. So, forgive my stupidity on that one. But yeah, puzzle basically very simplistic. But yeah, these outdoor areas blew me away when I was younger because they looked real to me. Like I never seen trees look this lifelike. You also have to remember that I didn't really understand what pre-rendered backgrounds were when I was younger. It was actually my brother who explained the concept to me. Yeah, I was kind of shocked when I found out that all these visuals were kind of like, they were almost a lie for all these years. I think Myst was one of the first games to use pre-rendered backgrounds effectively. It was certainly the biggest game at the time to use them. And here is, now believe it or not, the talisman from earlier actually unlocks the Magnum. But I hate this puzzle so fucking much because you insert the talisman and you get 3 more talismans back. That all you have to do is put them in the fucking tombstone right across from you. So what's the point? And the funny thing is, I used to always miss the Magnum because I didn't realize the back of these pieces had these buttons on them that you press to. Oh, it's so annoying. The more I think about it, my first 3 or 4 playthroughs of this game, I never got the Magnum because I never thought to check check the back of these talismans. But yeah, so basically you're inserting 1 talisman to get 3 talismans, which you then insert into another tablet or another area to get the Magnum. It just seems so pointless. I don't get this idea at all. But regardless, it gets you unquestionably the most powerful gun in the game, aside from the rocket launcher, of course. Yeah, we won't be using the Magnum that often now, but it is invaluable during some of the game's bosses. I should also highlight that since I am going for time during this playthrough, I'm going for under 3 hours. I chose not to save Chris, and I chose not to save Barry. Which means, by doing that allows you to skip the final boss, essentially, which saves about 10-15 minutes. And it also means you don't have to do all the bullshit with the Mo discs and all that. So usually, pretty much every time I would save everyone. But this time, for the sake of doing it in 3 hours, I had to forgo that procedure, or that part of it. Now we're coming up to Lisa Trevor's cabin. I don't know if this is her actual cabin, but yeah. It connects to her home in an interesting way. I really like this shot when you enter the cabin. And I'll show you a cool little detail there in a second. The main reason you're here is to get the crank. Whatever you do not open the fucking item box around here, because if you accidentally put your stuff in that item box, you will never get it back. So what happens here is you pick up the crank, and by picking up the crank, Lisa Trevor enters the house. There's a really cool shot here if you run towards the window when you get into the room that I didn't even know about for the longest time. But you can actually see her walk towards the room. I don't know how she gets here so quickly. This cutscene always confuses me because you get knocked out and then you get laid. You don't actually get laid. Don't worry, Lisa Trevor doesn't have sex with you. You get laid out on the carpet, and then Lisa enters the place again, and this time she wants to kill you. I never really understood what they were going for with this whole thing. Now, as far as I can see, there's only one way to avoid taking damage from Lisa Trevor here, and I make a balls of it here. So, but usually this works, and what you do is you run back here, and you hop down, and you wait for Lisa Trevor to hop down, and then you hop back up. Unfortunately, I didn't time it correctly, and I took damage, but. Yeah, if you want to avoid damage and you don't want to waste a shit ton of ammo on Lisa, this is usually the easiest way to do it. Also, she takes a shit ton of damage if she hits you, so you definitely want to be avoiding that. Fucker gets me there. Yeah, but now that she's out of the picture, it's home free or straight back to the courtyard. I don't know what I'm supposed to talk about during this trek back, but I feel like I'll leave the other pieces of RE7 DLC for when I run out of stuff to talk about. Oh, did you know there's another piece of DLC where it's Jack's birthday and you have to kill zombies to earn points? But in all seriousness, beyond all the bullshit, RE7's DLC is incredible, and I kind of wish I haven't played Village's DLC yet, but I heard it's very disappointing. You play as Rose, I think, in third person. But you're just going through the castle again. I'm one of those few people who actually love Village. I think that game deserves far more praise than it received, than it gets. But I think the one thing that bothers me about Village is I kind of wish the castle had been the entire game, or at least the majority of the game. I would have cut the fist demon out entirely, and maybe made the castle a third, or maybe a third longer. Because without question, that is the best part of the game. And again, it's the RE4 thing where, along with Resident Evil 4, I think Village has the worst story in the series. I think it's absolutely incomprehensible nonsense. But you can tell that they had way too many ideas, and structuring it all, in a coherent story was just it would have been borderline impossible. But what that means is you get loads of fun gameplay scenarios, and there's a lot of variety in that game. I think Village is great, and yeah, didn't get the praise it deserved in my opinion. Now, so we are back. I think I'm going to go drop off this shit first. Do I go drop off this shit first? Okay, that's weird. No, I don't. But I definitely did during my previous playthrough of Real Survival Mode. But I will say that the second time through, I managed my resources a lot better. Which I had to, because I wanted to get under 3 hours. Now here, there's a few dogs. But again, by walking, you can slow down the process of them chasing after you. I think the real annoying part here is the snakes. I don't know if this is just a hard mode thing, but every time I do this area, not this time, on the way back, there's snakes in this courtyard when you're returning to the mansion, and every single time they poison me, and I really don't, or at the very least I get attacked, and I genuinely have no fucking idea how to avoid them. So that is quite annoying, especially like I said, since they can poison you and there's so few blue herbs in the game. But yeah, this courtyard is more or less the same as it was in the original. There's been very few improvements, which is kind of ironic because I feel like it's the area that needed the most. Like I said, the part where you have to run around here twice to put in the battery is just a complete pain. It feels like complete padding and doesn't serve any real purpose. But now we are heading to the cabins, which is actually one of the better areas in the remake. I feel like there's a shark tank, believe it or not, in the cabins, underneath the cabins. And without question, it's the area that has received the biggest change over the original. In the original, the shark tank was one room with a slow-moving shark that was barely any threat. And, really, I don't even know why they bothered including a shark at all. But in the remake, it's a fantastic sequence. Even more so because sharks are like my biggest fear. I'm absolutely terrified of them. So I actually had to run out and get my brother to help me through this section the first time I played it because I was so overcome with fear. I don't deal with sharks very well at all. And yeah, which is funny because these don't even look like zombified sharks. They just look like regular fucking sharks. They didn't do anything to them. But I suppose sharks are naturally scary, so they don't really have to. But it's a fantastic sequence and probably one of the highlights of the entire game. It was actually a fear of sharks that stopped me from playing Resident Evil Revelations for the longest time because I was positive that was going to have I was positive it was going to have sharks, and I kind of feel like they missed a trick by not including any. I think the only other game with sharks in it is Resident Evil 6, and that was just shite. It's just a really terrible sequence, like most of Resident Evil 6. Yeah, here's my first encounter with the spiders. Spiders have never really done much for me in Resident Evil games. They've never really felt like much of a threat, unless you go out of your way to kill them. And I really don't understand why you would. They're usually always on the ceilings, and yeah, they're not much of a threat. There is a boss fight against a spider in Resident Evil 1, and yeah, there's a good chance you might end up getting poisoned there. I didn't get poisoned there. Yeah, but yeah, for the most part, spiders have always been one of the most useless enemies in any RE game. For me, the biggest threat in most RE games are hunters. So, because they're the only enemies, I think they're the only enemies that have an instant kill move. They can cut your head off with a single swipe if you're not careful, which used to always terrify me about them. I wish there had been more enemies like that in RE, because those enemies are the ones that stand out. You know, the ones that literally send a shiver up your spine just by encountering them, because you know it could all be over in a second if you're not careful. I think another playthrough I would like to do at some point is Code Veronica. I've managed to do Code Veronica in under 4 hours with no saves, and I would like to do something like that as a gameplay commentary. But the problem with Code Veronica is it has hunters, and the hunters are vicious in that game, and if you're not careful, the thing is, to get an A rank in Code Veronica, you can't save a single time, and you can't retry a single time. So you could get 3 hours into that game, and the hunter could cleave your head off, and that would be that, right back to the start. So I'd have to think before doing something like that. But my point is, I feel like I'm veering way off course, but my point is, most enemies in Resident Evil, they don't feel as threatening as they should, but the hunters are always an enemy I feel Capcom got right. They're probably my favorite enemies in the series. Lickers, I think Lickers were handled incredibly well in RE2 Remake. I really like this cutscene. Over here, Jill over here is Barry talking to himself. He isn't talking to himself, of course. He's probably talking to Wesker, but yeah, I just really like how their relationship was expanded upon in the remake. In the original, there was a lot of stupid parts, that decided what ending you'd get. Like, there's one part where Barry drops a rope down for you to climb down into this hole. There's this hole, so Barry gets a rope that allows you to climb down into the hole. Then he drops the rope. I'm guessing on purpose. Right? And then you're given the choice to either wait for him or continue on. But why would you ever think you have to wait for him? Because everyone is going to think he dropped the rope on purpose. So the obvious thing to do is to go on ahead. But no, you're actually supposed to wait. So does that mean he actually did drop the fucking rope by accident? Jesus Christ. I always hated that scene. And thankfully, RE Remake does away with all that shit. You're given very clear choice points to help decide what ending you get. When you find out that Barry has betrayed you, you're given the option to basically either give him a gun with which he can defend himself, or don't give him a gun. And your choice essentially decides whether he lives or dies. And that's a much better decision, I feel. Now, for most people playing the game, unless RE Remake is your first experience with Resident Evil, you're not going to you're going to give Barry the gun because you know that behind it, he's a good guy and he's being blackmailed and all this stuff. But if RE Remake it was your first experience with the original Resident Evil, I'd imagine a lot of people would struggle as to whether to give him the gun or not. So I really like how they handled Jill and Barry's relationship in the remake. I really like this room that's coming up now. It's I don't feel I can't say the S word, and I can't. But basically, a guy unalives himself in this room. Are you still allowed to even say that? And I think even that would maybe have been a step too far. Is this the room? Yeah. And you find his unalive note, or whatever. But it's really sad, It's again, it shows what a good storyteller Shinji Mikami can be when he wants to be, because it's just a real story about a human being who doesn't want to die, but is given very few options, and you feel his pain in his last few moments, and those are the kind of character moments I really appreciate in Resident Evil, and I kind of wish everyone in Resident Evil wasn't a superhero. I find that the first game a character appears in, they're vulnerable, and the second game they're in. Right, so Jill Valentine in Resident Evil 1 is like a rookie, she's able to survive, but she's vulnerable, she feels threatened by the monsters in this place. But then by Resident Evil 3, she's like a tank, she's like she's take no bullshit, she's a superhero. And Capcom have a habit of doing that with all their characters. So take Resident Evil 2. In the first game, Leon is vulnerable. He's in over his head. This is a real live or die moment for him. But then in RE4, again, he's a tank. He's a superhero. They don't know how to keep their characters vulnerable, and I feel that's why they veered so far into action. I don't know. Maybe it makes sense that Chris Redfield would be better prepared for zombies in RE5 than he would be in the original. That makes sense. But that's why, despite him being a very boring character, I really liked Ethan in Resident Evil 7 because he's just a regular dude. And I feel like that's what Resident Evil desperately needs at this point. I know Requiem is kind of doing that again. I can't remember the name of the main character, Carla or something. I don't know, but then I'm also pretty sure that Leon is going to be in that game as well. So I feel like if Resident Evil is going to start going down the survival horror route again, they kind of need to do what survival horror does. They kind of need to do what Silent Hill does and just have regular normie people as the protagonist, and I feel like, say what you want about Ethan, but he did bring that back to the series. He did bring a sense of powerlessness and all that back to the series, and I'd really like to see that kind of return. So here is the shark tank. Unfortunately, they decided to keep the crate puzzle. They're still, despite replacing a lot of the crate puzzles from the original, there's still way too many in my opinion, and they serve no other purpose than to drag the pacing down. I didn't realise just how lousy with crate puzzles the original Resident Evil is, but yeah, while the remake makes significant improvements in that regard, there's still way too many for my liking. But I find this Shark Tank section to be fantastically well done, and like I said, one of the best areas in the game. What's cool, and what I didn't realize the first few times I played, is that I believe, just get through if I could get through the fucking gate, I could talk about, but I feel like if you get bitten, there's a bigger shark. There's like 2 or 3 smaller sharks in the area. But then there's also a big, I'd almost say it's the size of a great white, lower down. But if you get bitten, I think the blood attracts the bigger mama shark even quicker to your position, which is a really cool, it's a really cool idea. Look, like I grabbed here, I get bitten, and I think the blood. I don't get eaten by the bigger shark, but I think you hear this Jaws like music start to play, and I think it. I think if you get bit, the blood does attract the bigger shark, which is a really cool, cool little touch that I didn't realize for the longest time. This next area is cool too. You see, they do a lot with the sharks in this, where they barely did anything with them in the original, and like I said, sharks are just such a naturally good monster. Like, there's a reason there's so many horror films with sharks as the main enemy. You know, how many can you think of with tigers or fucking bears or stuff like that? You know, like I used to always get made fun of for having a fear of sharks, but like the movies speak for themselves, man. There's a reason people keep coming back to sharks as enemies in horror films, because they're just terrifying. And yeah, I kind of wish Resident Evil did more with the whole shark idea here. This is a really cool section where you're given a very short period of time to lock down this area before it gets the window smashed and you're flooded. It's not that difficult, but I liked how tense it was the first time, because I don't know, it just adds a sense of urgency, and again it's different. It's gameplay variety. It's not simply shoot this shark or shoot this zombie or shoot this monster. It's think about what you're doing to survive the situation, and it's a really good inclusion. So yeah. I'm amazed I haven't run out of things to talk about yet. This is the longest I've ever talked straight for in a long time, and god damn it, I really feel like I'm running out of things to say about these sharks. They're not all that interesting, but yeah. Now that's all the water flooded, so now we can go out and get the key that will give us access. Oh no, I didn't drain the water yet. Sorry. Fuck's sake. We can now go out and get the key that will give us access to the room with Plant 42 in it. If you remember, Plant 42 is the big plant. Bet you never would have guessed. It's the big plant that you need to kill in order to gain the mansion key that opens up the last few rooms in the mansion. And in the original, it's kind of interesting because that's another reason why it makes sense to save Richard, because if you don't save Richard with Chris, I don't know, it might even apply to Jill, but I know for a fact that if you don't save Richard with Chris, you need to then, Chris gets grabbed by Plant 42, and it is then up to Rebecca to save him by doing this really convoluted puzzle involving chemicals. And the reason I won't be able to show you that here is because completing that puzzle and everything would take at least 10 minutes, and it would put me over time. So in order to face the game in under 3 hours, I just had to bypass all that stuff. But it's cool, and I feel that that's a more interesting one. I really like this scene. You think the shark is dead, and then this happens, and it's just it's almost like it's such a fucking movie moment. You know, it's like something you'd see in a Jaws film, not a good Jaws film, maybe Jaws 7. Or some shit like that, but yeah, it's such a cool conclusion to this sequence. And my favorite part, the best part of the lot is, even though he's fucked, you've absolutely fried him. You still have to walk past the corpse to get the key. It's so well done. I love that. You know, I guarantee you. You know, despite thinking he might be dead, I guarantee you there wasn't a single person who wasn't freaked out that the shark might jump back to life any second there. So well done. The hell was I saying? Yeah, I kind of feel like Plant 42 is a much more interesting boss when it's a puzzle, because otherwise it's a very by the numbers, shoot the fucker until he's dead kind of boss, and yeah, it's not exactly all that interesting. I am coming up on 1 hour 34 minutes talking now, so I'm going to probably get to the end of Plant 42 and leave part 1 here. Yeah, I'm surprised I still have stuff to talk about. I do think I do think it's an interesting game with an interesting history, and I'm glad it got remastered. I know for some reason, especially with Japanese devs, exclusives were everything to them back in the day. And I remember Shinji Mikami saying that he'd commit. I can't remember the name of it, and I don't want to mispronounce it, but he'd basically unalive himself if Resident Evil 4 ever came to any other platforms. You know, which means now it's come to 24 other platforms. I can't imagine what he's supposed to do to himself now, but it's probably horrific. But I imagine when Capcom made this, they never had any intention of bringing it to other platforms. They probably saw it as a bust anyways, because it didn't say anything on GameCube. But when it finally did come to every other platform, it sold gangbusters. You know, it sold probably millions of copies on Steam and PS4 alone. So I'm glad more people finally have an opportunity to play it. And yeah, people always think that exclusives are anti-consumer and stuff like that. But I don't know if I agree with that. I feel like exclusives give a console its personality. I feel I've had the PS5 for about 3 years now, and I feel nothing for the fucking thing, because every game is either on PC or it's a game I don't like. I didn't like God of War Ragnarok. I thought Spider-Man 2 was shit. I think Spider-Man 2 is genuinely a bad game, and this is coming from someone who loves Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2018. I just don't think Sony have it anymore, and a big reason for that. Oh, Astrobot's amazing, but a big reason for that is just the fact that they're all about these, AAA blockbusters that are so expensive that they can't even keep them as exclusives. They have to release them on PC as well, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I kind of feel like I miss when consoles had a personality, and Resident Evil Remake certainly gave the GameCube a personality, along with Resident Evil 4, of course. But saying that, I'm happy that practically every game is multi-platform these days, because it allows everyone to play it. But by that same token, I don't see the point in really owning a console anymore. And I think after PS5, I think that's it. I think I'll just get either a Steam Deck. Steam Deck 2 will probably be out by then, or a PC, because I just, if every game is on every platform, why the fuck am I paying to play online? Like, why do I have to pay to play online on PlayStation? But no, I don't. I can play pretty much all the same games and not have to pay to play online on PC. It just makes no sense anymore, to be honest. At least Nintendo will probably be the last to put the games on PC. So for now, there's still a reason to own them, but I don't know how the fuck I got on the top of exclusives, but my point is that Resident Evil was a really great get for Nintendo. Despite it not selling all that well, it really gave that console its personality in the early days. And I mean, look at things now. The GameCube is one of the most fondly looked back on consoles of all time. It's up there with the Dreamcast. Like, I never owned a Dreamcast, but I understand 100% why people love that console. It has a gorgeous library of games that just evokes such a feeling of nostalgia in you. Nostalgia, whatever the fuck you pronounce it. So yeah, I kind of miss when consoles made me feel like that. This coziness, this nostalgia that I just don't get from modern systems anymore. I think that was the point I was trying to make. Unfortunately, I decided to backtrack to the Iron Box before taking on this boss, so I guess it's time to talk about another piece of RE7 DLC. I think one of the most underappreciated pieces of DLC in RE7 was Eat and Must Die mode. It's a mode where pretty much everything kills you in one hit, including boxes and stuff like this, but basically what that mode requires you to do is pay attention to your surroundings. Certain crates will explode, but if you listen carefully, those crates will make a ticking sound. The ones that explode will make a ticking sound. And it's basically the ultimate survival horror experience, when you really think about it, because it's only, I think it can be finished in about 15 minutes, but there's no checkpoints, there's no hand-holding. It's basically you surviving in just a crazy situation. I really like it. It can be very, very frustrating, but yeah. Any other pieces of DLC I'll have to talk about later, I'm afraid. So yeah, we're getting ready to flight. we're getting ready to fight Plant 42 here. I think I went in with too much stuff, assuming the fight would be harder than it is. It's a frustrating fight, but thankfully the plant doesn't take that much health off you. Yeah, in the original, in the original, Barry would come in with a flamethrower and help you out. But for whatever reason, at least during this playthrough, now maybe years ago I managed to get it to happen, but in this playthrough, no, he doesn't show up. And honestly, I can't remember the last time he showed up in Remake when I was playing it. So maybe it doesn't happen, but yeah, essentially you're on your own for this fight with Jill. And again, while it isn't difficult, you're going to get hit, and so it's best to be prepared. This is one boss where the awkward camera angles and clunky controls really hurt the overall experience, and you'll see what I'm talking about when the boss fight starts. It's a better boss fight than it was in the original. There's stairs now. There's a second floor that you can run up to give yourself a better shot at the plant, which all that was missing from the original. So, yeah. You're probably wondering why I've stopped using comparison shots with the original game. Honestly, I only played the first half of the original game and got bored. So, yeah. Yeah, so that's why there's been no more footage from that. But here's the boss now. Again, the key thing you want to do is get up to the second floor as quickly as possible. So you're pretty much a dead man walking on the first floor. But here, you see, you have a good shot. You have to wait for the cocoon to open, essentially, and just hit it with everything you've got. Then you've got to run as quickly as you can, otherwise you will take damage, like I did there. I find a good way is to run along to the side there and then back. And by the time you're back, the cocoon should be open again. Yeah. And hit it again. Now, this is phase 1 over. Both phases are essentially the same, but yes, you do essentially need to kill the plant twice, so to speak, in order to finish it off for good. Yeah, it's an okay boss, but again, I think in a lot of ways Remake realised the limitations of tank controls, which is why there's so few bosses like this in the game. Many bosses, like the shark, are more puzzle focused. Yeah, and even the snake isn't anywhere near as aggressive as it was in the original. Now I got knocked off there. Usually you'd think that would take a shit ton of damage, but it actually doesn't. Yeah, I'm more or less fine. So yeah, that's more visually stressful than it actually is. So now we're just about to kill the plant now. There it is. So yeah, and I think once I pick up the key, we will be leaving it here. I hope somehow you found enjoyment from this video and that you will hopefully stick around for part 2, which will be slightly shorter than this part. Personally, I enjoyed having an opportunity to talk about this game. It's a game I could never review because I just have too much to say about it, and I'd probably gush over it a bit too much. But this way I'm allowed to voice my criticisms of the game as well, you know? So, yeah, that's part 1, and I will see you soon for part 2, and thank you for watching.